Okay, so now let's talk about another issue that the authors bring up that's related to how God was created and the doctrine of image. And it's a debate that some people have had. Maybe you've had this debate. Maybe you have no idea about it. So this might or might not be interesting to you. But it's the debate over dichotomy and trichotomy. And here's the question: is man two-part? Does he exist as body and soul? Or is he three-part? Does he exist as body, soul, and spirit? And so the authors address that a little bit. And as they do that, they're going to go through the aspects of humanity in the Old Testament. In the Old Testament, they talk about the soul. They talk about nephesh, which refers to the person as a creation in relation to God rather than immortal, immaterial substance. So this is again how the Old Testament lays some of this out. The Old Testament talks about the spirit also. In humans, it can mean mind or resolve or will. And the Bible, of course, in the Old Testament talks about flesh or the physical body. 1/3 of the time, it's in reference to animals and never to God. They go on, they say that the Old Testament also talks about the heart, that human beings have this thing called heart, which is only used with human beings, and it doesn't refer to the anatomical heart. So the heart is the focus of the personal life, the reasoning, responding, deciding self. It is the deepest center of the human person, the driving force, and the most fundamental values from which our acts and attitudes come. So, for example, I feel it deep in my heart. So that idea, that concept is in the Old Testament. Now, what about the New Testament? The New Testament reveals some other things about aspects of our humanity. It, of course, talks about the body, the physical aspect of a person or animal. It talks about the soul. Now, the authors point out that in the New Testament, Paul, when he talks about the soul, in his thinking, it's referring to the whole person created by God with an inner life of motive, thought, feeling, and the like. And so that's what the soul means in Paul's writings. Now, the Bible also talks in the New Testament about the spirit, pneuma. And again, the authors talk a little bit about what that means. The New Testament also speaks about the heart, the cardia in Greek. And it also talks about the mind. It talks about the conscience, and etc. And so for the authors, their point is this, that in summary, while the Bible speaks of aspects of our humanity in various terms, Old Testament, New Testament, it is not in as neat and tidy a manner as some would prefer. Maybe that's just what you thought as you were reading through this. Maybe you were a little bit confused by this. But the point is, there's really not a real clear understanding of it when you go through the Old and the New Testaments. And so when we're talking about dichotomy and trichotomy, let's start with dichotomy, which teaches that we are basically two parts, that which is material and physical, and that which is immaterial and spiritual. So that's what when people believe in the dichotomy of a person, of a human being, they say there's basically just two main categories. There's immaterial and spiritual. That's one category. So the spirit. And then there's the material or the physical side, the body. And it's just the two of them. Now, trichotomy, on the other hand, agrees with dichotomy, but with one exception. Unlike the dichotomist who sees the spirit and soul as usually synonymous terms in the Bible, trichotomists say that we have a spirit with God consciousness and a spiritual capacity through which we relate to God in addition to a soul with the affections, desires, reason, emotion, will, self-consciousness, etc. So in summary, dichotomists typically believe that the soul and the spirit are basically the same thing. Whenever the Bible talks about soul or spirit, there's no difference between those two things. It's generally referring to the same thing. Whereas trichotomists believe that the spirit is a separate thing, and so the tri means three. So we have body, soul, and spirit, and the spirit is the part that relates to God, that has a consciousness of God. Now, maybe already by now you look at this and you say, who really cares? And maybe this doesn't really impact you at all. But in the author's point of view, they say that to truly help people, we must minister to the whole person, since true spirituality encompasses all of our being. The authors are dichotomists, so they believe that true spirituality encompasses every part of us. And so they don't just separate it into the spirit. And so as a result, they say that we must minister to people physically, emotionally, volitionally, etc., in all these different ways. So in their view, this does have an impact on the way we relate to one another and the way, say, for example, pastors counsel people. It matters which side you fall on, whether you're a dichotomist or trichotomist, but that's up for you to discuss if it's even interesting to you. So hit pause right now if you would like to and talk about this before we go on to the next video.